Have you ever stopped to think about what actually happens when a school alarm goes off in the dead of night? For thousands of school property staff all across New Zealand, it's not a hypothetical. It means a jarring wake-up call and a hidden burden that's become, well, not just unsustainable, but as we're about to see, often completely illegal. So let's talk about that 2 a.m. call. So if you ask most people that question, they'd probably guess a security guard, maybe the police. But the reality? It's often very, very different. And that responsibility falls on the shoulders of some of the school's lowest paid employees.
For school property managers, this isn't a one-off thing. No, it's a recurring, middle-of-the-night reality that just keeps happening.
And the scale of this is just massive. We're talking about roughly 6,500 people who are caught in this culture of work creep. It's this unspoken but very real, absolute expectation that you're on call 24/7. And it all comes from the super outdated idea of a live-in caretaker who was, just always there. The problem is, this old school model is now clashing head-on with modern employment laws and just basic standards of fairness and workplace safety. And right here, this is the key. This is where the conversation shifts from being about what's fair to what is actually legal in New Zealand right now. So to really get why this is so off, we need to look at three things: the pay, the law, and the legal precedent that's already been set on this exact issue. Okay, first, let's talk money. Agreed to caretaker, the very person who's often expected to jump out of bed and race to the school, earns a maximum of about 55 grand a year. Now compare that to the person with the ultimate responsibility for the school, the principal. A senior primary principal can pull in a base salary of over $190,000. And seeing it like this, wow, it just perfectly illustrates the economic inequity, doesn't it? The person earning as little as a third of the salary is the one being asked to disrupt their sleep, their family, their entire life at a moment's notice. Now let's get into the law, because this is where it gets really interesting. New Zealand's Employment Relations Act is crystal clear about this. If an employer wants you to be available outside of your normal work hours, your contract has to include what's called an availability provision. And that provision is only legal if it includes reasonable compensation specifically for being on call. So what's the bottom line here? It's simple. Without that extra, specified pay for being on standby, any requirement to be on call 24/7 has zero legal standing. It just can't be enforced. And this isn't just a theory, by the way. The courts have already ruled on this. In a really important case, the employment court decided that an uncompensated, absolute expectation to be available puts an unjustifiable disadvantage on an employee because it unfairly messes with their ability to live their life. So if New Zealand law is already this clear, what are other countries doing? Well, let's just take a quick trip across the Tasman and look at a really compelling model they've come up with. So in 2024, Australia's Fair Work Amendment brought in a legal right to disconnect. What it does is give employees the right to just refuse unreasonable work-related contact outside of their paid hours. But here's the absolute game changer in the Aussie law. It actually connects what's reasonable to how much you're paid and how much responsibility you have. It basically says, the higher your salary, the more an employer can reasonably expect from you after hours. But the lower your pay, the greater your legal protection is to just switch off. All of this really points toward a much more modern, professional way of handling school security. One that actually protects both the property and the people. And best practice really follows a clear, logical system. First, you get professional security companies to be the first responders, to physically go and check the site. Second, senior leaders only get called for confirmed serious events. Third, the school board has to recognize that the fatigue from being always on is a genuine health and safety hazard. And fourth, any callouts have to be based on a mutual agreement, not just assumed. And that third point about fatigue, that's not just a nice to have. Under the Health and Safety at Work Act, school boards have a legal duty to manage fatigue. They can't just pass the risk of burnout down to an employee. So this brings us right to the heart of the matter. Understanding that under current New Zealand law, property staff already have very clear rights. Here's a really simple way to think about it. Imagine a neighborhood watch. The property manager is like your regular neighbor. They've got a day job, they need to sleep. The principal, with their high salary, is like the paid head of the neighborhood association, the one responsible for the overall safety of the area. And when you put it like that, you see how absurd the current situation is.
Expecting the sleeping neighbor to run outside for every single car alarm while the person actually paid to oversee safety sleeps soundly? That's not a security plan. It's just exploitation.
So, to wrap it all up, this is a structural problem. The burden of after-hours security should fall on professional services or on senior leaders who are actually compensated for that level of responsibility. And for property managers, the law is already on their side, giving them a clear right to say no to being on call 24/7 without proper compensation. Which leaves us with one final, pretty big question. We've seen that the pay gap is huge, the legal framework is clear, and the health and safety duties are right there in black and white. So why on earth does this culture of expecting unpaid 24/7 availability from some of our lowest paid school staff still exist?